The studio lights were too bright. The air inside the room was too still, like something important was about to happen, but nobody knew what. Supposed to be a serious panel on race and justice in America, aired live on one of the biggest news networks in the country. The host, a well-known anchor with a polished smile, sat in the middle. On one side of him sat Pam Bondi, a former attorney general known for her sharp, often controversial opinions. She had already been speaking for several minutes, confidently quoting numbers and blaming personal choices for the inequality that millions of Americans still faced. The audience listened politely, but the mood was uncomfortable. Then the host leaned forward, a small smile on his face, and said, "Before we move on, we have a surprise guest joining us." The studio doors opened. Denzel Washington stepped onto the stage. The audience gasped, then erupted in applause. Some stood, cheering, not just because he was a famous actor, but because of what he represented: calm authority, lived experience, and a voice people trusted. Pam Bondi's smile froze for a moment. She wasn't expecting this. Denzel walked to his seat with a quiet confidence. He nodded to the host, then to Bondi, then to the crowd. "Thank you," he said simply. The applause died down. The silence that followed was tense. The host quickly tried to steer the conversation. "Mr. Washington, thank you for being here. As you know, we've been discussing the state of racial justice in America." Pam was just making the point that many of the issues are due to personal responsibility rather than systemic barriers. "Would you care to respond?" Denzel looked over at Pam. She was already looking at him, her eyes steady but defensive. He spoke slowly. "I think it's easy to talk about numbers when you've never had to survive what those numbers represent," he said. "People aren't born broken. Systems break them. Generations of pain, poverty, and struggle are not personal failures. They're historical consequences." The room fell silent. Pam leaned forward, smiling tightly. "Well, if people like, you are so unhappy here," she said. "Maybe it's time you went back to Africa. Maybe then you'd understand how lucky you are to be in America." The words landed like a punch. The audience didn't move. A man in the front row dropped his pen. A camera operator near the back whispered, "Did she just say that?" The host's mouth opened, but no sound came. Everyone looked at Denzel. He didn't flinch, sat still for a long second, then slowly adjusted the cuff of his shirt. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but carried weight like thunder wrapped in velvet. "My ancestors didn't emigrate here," he said. "They were chained, whipped, and forced to build a country that still doesn't know what to do with them." His voice grew firmer. "You don't get to tell me to go back anywhere. My roots are here, deep, painful, and unmovable. This land was watered with our blood. We don't owe it our silence." The audience sat in stunned silence. Pam looked caught off guard. She opened her mouth but said nothing. A soft clapping began in the back. Then more. Soon, the whole audience was standing. Applause filled the room, but it wasn't loud. It was heavy, emotional, like people were clapping for something deeper than just a man's response. They were clapping for truth. The host looked panicked. A voice came through his earpiece. He quickly announced, "We'll be right back after a short break." The screen cut to commercial. But backstage, a young camera operator had kept recording. His personal phone had been running the whole time. He didn't stop filming because he knew the real story had just begun. The commercial break was supposed to last 90 seconds. It stretched to 5 minutes, then 10. Behind the scenes, the studio turned into chaos. Producers huddled in corners, whispering furiously. The host stood frozen, still wearing his polite half-smile like a mask. Pam Bondi had stormed off to her dressing room, refusing to come back on stage unless Denzel issued an apology. And Denzel! He remained seated in his chair, calm, collected, quietly sipping a glass of water while watching everyone else unravel. The young camera operator, Marcus, slipped into the shadows. He checked his phone. The clip he recorded during the live broadcast was clean, powerful, raw. He knew this footage was more than a moment. It was history. And it wasn't going to stay hidden for long. "Cut that segment," one senior producer said sharply. "We'll say it was a technical issue." Too late, another snapped. "Twitter's already exploding. People are asking what happened. We need a response." "No," the executive producer cut in. "What we need is silence. No official statement, no upload. We bury it." Tonight never happened. But Marcus had already sent the clip to his sister, a college student and part-time activist in Atlanta. She posted it on her private account with a single line. "They tried to hide it. We saw everything. It exploded." Within an hour, the hashtag #MyRootsAreHere was trending globally. Celebrities reposted it. Politicians weighed in. News anchors scrambled to catch up. Denzel Washington's quiet fire had set off a chain reaction. In classrooms across America, students watched the moment as teachers paused their lectures to discuss history, identity, and accountability. Church pastors quoted his words from the pulpit. Activists printed the line onto protest signs overnight. But inside the studio, a storm was brewing, not of applause, but of control. Pam Bondi emerged from her room, her expression stiff and composed. She stood in front of the network executives, arms crossed. "I want a retraction," she said. "He attacked me on air." "You attacked yourself," a young assistant muttered. She turned sharply. "Excuse me?" The room went quiet. No one repeated it. Meanwhile, the host paced in his office. This wasn't the kind of controversy he was built for. He was a careful man. His job was to ask tough questions, but never to light fires he couldn't put out. And now the studio's biggest guest had just made him look like a puppet on live television. "I didn't plan this," he said defensively. To a senior producer, he flipped the script. "No," the producer replied. "You brought a knife to a moral gunfight." Outside the studio, news vans were already lining up. Protesters gathered. Some carried signs that read, "Tell the truth, not just the ratings." Others held portraits of historical figures: Harriet Tubman, Malcolm X, Frederick Douglass, next to a photo of Denzel from the night before. Somewhere in Washington, D.C., an emergency briefing was being held. The president's communications team was reviewing the viral footage. Advisors debated whether to address it or ignore it. One aide said flatly, "If we stay silent, we look scared. If we comment, we risk dividing our own base." In Atlanta, Marcus and his sister watched as their phones buzzed nonstop. Journalists, activists, even Hollywood studios were reaching out. Everyone wanted the original clip. Everyone wanted to talk. "Do we release the rest?" his sister asked. "There's more." He blinked. Marcus nodded. "Yeah." The camera kept rolling after the cut. Back in the studio, Denzel was finally standing to leave. A low-level producer approached him timidly. "Mr. Washington, just so you know, this has become a thing." Denzel looked at her kindly, but with purpose. "Was always going to be a thing," he said. "It just didn't expect it would be this quiet." The producer hesitated. "You want to make a public statement? Clarify anything?" "No," he said. "The truth doesn't need a follow-up." And with that, he walked out of the building into the cool night air, unaware that his words were already echoing in halls of power, schools, courtrooms, and homes. He had said one line, and it was enough to shake a nation from its sleep. But the real reckoning hadn't even started yet. By morning, it was everywhere. The leaked clip had hit 23 million views overnight. Every major news outlet from CNN to Al Jazeera to Fox was scrambling to cover it, each spinning the story in their own direction. Liberal networks called it a moment of necessary reckoning. Conservative anchors called it performative outrage, but no one could ignore it. The footage was out, and the fire was spreading. In New York, producers held a crisis meeting before the sun even rose. The host of the show still shook and sat with his face in his hands. This was supposed to be about control, he mumbled. Safe television. Little tension, then back to the jokes. You invited Denzel Washington, someone replied dryly. Did you really think he'd stick to the script? They had tried scrubbing the clip from their official pages, but it was no use. The public had claimed it. Celebrities were quoting it, remixing it, turning it into protest art. Even corporations, desperate to stay relevant, tweeted about belonging and dignity, quoting Denzel's words while ignoring their own complicity in the system. He called out. But the biggest shock came not from Twitter or TikTok, it came from Capitol Hill. That morning, a closed-door briefing took place between select lawmakers and intelligence officials. On the screen in the room, the full, unedited footage from the studio, including what happened after the network cut the feed, the part Marcus hadn't yet released. In that unseen clip, Pam Bondi didn't just walk off. She said something that hadn't gone public, something that wasn't just offensive, but potentially explosive. She had muttered almost off mic, "We've built this country, and now they want to rewrite it with guilt and grievance." A nearby boom mic caught it, clear as day. One senator watching the tape shook his head. "If that leaks," he said grimly, "we're looking at a cultural earthquake." Another added, "She's not just a commentator. She still holds influence in federal committees. This can't stay hidden." But the real fear wasn't Bondi yet. Was Denzel's effect? His words had cut across party lines. Veterans supported him, teachers quoted him. Even a former Republican governor tweeted, "Truth, when spoken quietly, can still shake mountains." In Atlanta, Marcus and his sister sat on their couch, phones lighting up every second. A journalist from a major paper was begging them for the full clip. Was a lawyer. Even an executive from a streaming platform called with a wild offer to turn the footage into a feature-length documentary. "I'm not selling it," Marcus said. His sister nodded. "But if we're going to release it, we do it smart. Not just a drop, a story." Meanwhile, Bondi had gone silent. No press appearances, no social media posts. Her team released a vague statement blaming video manipulation in a hostile studio environment, but it didn't land. Weren't buying spin anymore? They had seen what happened. And yet, what the public didn't know was that the network was under pressure not from Bondi, but from foreign interests. A whistleblower inside the studio had just alerted journalists. Major advertisers were threatening to pull funding if the segment wasn't officially condemned. And those advertisers, some were tied to foreign governments with stakes in keeping America's internal divisions alive. It wasn't just a media scandal now. It was geopolitical. It's good Washington. A White House advisor warned the president, "This isn't just about race or media bias anymore. This is about what happens when a moment gets too real, when truth goes live and can't be edited." The president stayed silent. He didn't want to be seen picking sides in a cultural storm. But privately, he had watched the clip twice. Alone, that night, as the network debated how to respond, and Marcus and his sister planned their next move. An anonymous email was sent to every major newsroom in the country. It included a password-protected link. Attached was the full uncut footage. The email read, "You tried to silence history. We recorded it instead. Decide what to do with it." The real war wasn't on television anymore. It had just moved into every screen in America. The files spread faster than anyone expected. By noon, journalists from rival networks were all publishing similar headlines. The clip they didn't want you to see. Independent reporters confirmed its authenticity. Media watchdogs jumped in. The network released a stiff statement, blaming a rogue employee. But the truth was clear. The footage was real, and someone inside the building had leaked it. And it wasn't just the footage. It was what followed. The full video showed what happened after Pam Bondi's roots comment and Denzel's thunderous reply. What hadn't aired was Bondi's quiet, bitter mutter, "Rewrite it with guilt and grievance." And the chaos that followed, when she realized her mic had picked it up, a producer could be heard swearing. The host's face turned pale. Then Bondi stood and walked off the set, live cameras still rolling, her heels clicking like gunshots on the polished studio floor. Denzel never looked at her again. He just sat in silence. But now the world had seen it, and reactions weren't just emotional, they were strategic. In Europe, politicians cited the clip during parliamentary debates on racial equity. In Africa, news anchors praised Denzel's line as an awakening moment for the Western conscience. Meanwhile, social media exploded with analysis, mockery, and support. TikTok flooded with duets quoting the line, "My roots are here," deep, painful, and unmovable. Students began organizing discussion panels. Activists demanded that networks stop using racial trauma for ratings. Faith leaders called for calm reflection. But in darker corners of the internet, white nationalist forums raged. They accused Denzel of turning a talk show into a race war. Anonymous accounts began doxing the camera operator who had leaked the footage. And then the threats started. Marcus received the first one that evening. It came as a voicemail, robotic, garbled, and short. "Shut it down or we will." He played it 3 times before sending it to a cybersecurity contact. "Could be nothing," the expert replied. "Could also be real." But Marcus knew it wasn't nothing. His phone had been glitching for days. His sister's laptop camera light flicked on by itself that morning. Someone was watching. The network, under massive pressure, called an emergency. Board meeting. Sponsors were threatening to pull out. Public relations teams were drowning. Half the staff wanted to apologize and move on. The other half wanted to sue Denzel for defamation, a laughable move, but one that revealed how desperate things had become. Meanwhile, Denzel Washington remained silent. He gave no interviews, made no statements, canceled all scheduled appearances. His publicist simply said, "Mr. Washington said what he needed to say. The rest is yours to figure out." But behind the silence, something was brewing. An anonymous email account began contacting prominent Black journalists. Inside each message, links to a private archive, raw footage, outtakes, production memos, and even internal chat logs from the show's staff. The files revealed something disturbing. Bondi hadn't been a random guest. She was part of a planned ambush segment. Executives wanted viral conflict to boost declining ratings. They had approved the questions ahead of time. Even the host's opening jab was scripted. Bondi's line wasn't. But they had hoped for a clash, just not one this explosive. Now the plan had backfired, and everyone was trying to hide their fingerprints. The most shocking file in the leak. A message chain where a producer joked, "Let her say something spicy. Denzel will handle it classy. We'll cut it before it goes too far." But it had gone too far. And now people wanted answers. The White House press secretary was asked about the clip during a live briefing. She hesitated, then gave a carefully crafted response about the importance of dignity in national conversations. But reporters weren't buying it. One even asked, "Do you believe what Denzel said?" She didn't reply. By that night, protests had begun outside the studio's headquarters, peaceful but loud. Handmade signs quoting Denzel's words. Teenagers on bullhorns, retired veterans in folding chairs. And then someone handed Marcus a flash drive. It came from an older man in a tan coat. No name, no words. Just a small note. "You're not done yet." Marcus plugged it into his laptop. It was a blueprint, a complete list of show episodes, guest coordination notes, and keyword tags used by producers to plan conflict content. And at the center, a document marked Sacred Strings. Inside were notes suggesting that this wasn't the first time such a setup had occurred. There had been others, lesser-known figures. Conversations edited, lives quietly destroyed. Ratings always the priority. This time they had picked the wrong man. Marcus looked at his sister. They've been playing God with the truth. She nodded. Ah! So we make them tell it. But just as they began uploading the documents, their screen went black. A single message blinked in white text. Back away. Final warning. The war wasn't just on screens anymore. It had just come home. The screen stayed black for 10 full seconds. Then it rebooted as if nothing had happened. Marcus stared at the blinking cursor, heart racing. Someone was in their system. This wasn't some bored hacker or teenage troll. This was coordinated, sophisticated. His phone buzzed with a single-word text. Stop. No number, no name. His sister Alana didn't flinch. They're bluffing, she said, though her voice trembled slightly. They want you scared enough to pull back. I already am scared, Marcus admitted. That doesn't mean we stop. Alana nodded, walking over to unplug their router offline. Air-gapped from here on out, they moved fast, setting up a secure drive, copying the files. Within minutes, they had everything backed up onto 2 separate flash drives. One would go to Marcus's source in the independent press. The other would be physically delivered to a civil rights law firm in D.C. They weren't just leaking this now. They were going to bring it to light the right way. With legal weight behind it, but outside, the storm was growing. Major news. Outlets, feeling pressure from their audiences, began demanding access to the full, uncut footage. The studio still refused. Maintaining their internal investigation was ongoing. Ratings were tanking. Advertisers were pulling out one by one. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi had gone completely dark. No public appearances, no tweets, not even a denial. And Denzel Washington, still silent. Until that evening, without warning, a video appeared on his official account. No background music, no graphics. Just Denzel sitting in a plain room, looking directly into the camera. His voice was calm but firm. You've already seen the moment. But what you didn't see is what came after. They cut the feed, but I stayed seated. I stayed silent. Not because I had nothing left to say, but because I wanted the silence to speak louder than any headline. He leaned in slightly. This isn't about me. This is about the way we've allowed truth to become entertainment. We've turned national trauma into televised sport. We've built platforms where disrespect is rewarded and dignity is mocked. He paused, then added, but not this time. The video ended there. No hashtags, no promotions, no follow-up. Within hours, it had 30 million views. But that wasn't all. Another leak hit the web minutes later. Not from Marcus this time, but someone deep inside the network. It included internal chat transcripts of producers discussing how to bait Denzel during the panel. One line stood out in particular. If we rattle him just enough, he might say something we can twist. That was the final crack. Suddenly, former staff members began speaking up. Whistleblowers, editors, even an intern. Anonymous interviews popped up on podcasts and blogs. They described a culture of manipulation. Guests handpicked for outrage. Segments designed like traps. One former producer even claimed that Bondi had been encouraged to stir the pot. With the line "Back to Africa" scribbled in her prep notes under the label "Push Button." Bondi's team denied it, but the handwriting matched hers. And the backlash was instant. Now, the story wasn't just trending, it had swallowed the news cycle. Lawmakers demanded hearings. Civil rights leaders demanded an apology. Even sponsors began issuing statements, distancing themselves from the show and the network. Inside the studio, panic turned into silence. The host Colbert was reportedly deeply shaken, according to an unnamed staff member. He hadn't returned to air since the incident, and rumors swirled that he was considering resignation. But this wasn't just about one host or one show anymore. It was about all of it. The machinery behind what Americans were fed every night. The quiet deals, the editorial bias. The way outrage was farmed, monetized, and weaponized. And somewhere, In a quiet apartment, Marcus and Alana prepared to deliver the final file. Project Sacrament. It was the internal document that tied everything together, dating back over a decade, showing how certain guests were blacklisted, others targeted, all based on a system of audience manipulation. In one memo, a chilling note was found. Our goal is not clarity, it's reaction. Truth is optional. Marcus knew what that meant. They had never been interested in telling stories, only in controlling them. That night, they arranged a quiet meeting with a national investigative reporter, a neutral party, trusted. The reporter arrived in a worn trench coat, eyes tired but burning with urgency. He didn't say much. He just took the flash drive, nodded, and walked away. But as Marcus watched him disappear into the crowd, a single thought echoed in his mind. If they've done this once, they've done it before. And the question that remained wasn't if this system would collapse, but how many stories it had already buried. The real battle had just begun. The network's silence broke like a dam under pressure. By dawn, headlines across every major outlet screamed variations of the same thing. Internal documents reveal media conspiracy. Screens from the leaked file, Project Sacrament, were now public. The files didn't just outline media manipulation. They named people, executives, anchors, PR, strategists, lobbyists. What shook the public the most wasn't just the racial targeting, it was the algorithmic precision. Data on how to trigger outrage in Black audiences. Segments crafted to divide Latino communities. Memos detailing how to edit footage to frame certain activists as aggressive or uncooperative. The public outrage grew. What started as a cultural moment was now a national reckoning. Congressional leaders demanded emergency hearings. Civil rights lawyers called for federal investigations. Protesters gathered outside the network's headquarters, holding signs that read, "We are not your ratings strategy, and truth is not a trend." Inside the studio, security was tightened. The building became a fortress. Staff were told not to speak to the press, and yet more leaks poured out. A janitor, a lighting technician, a former intern. All had seen pieces of the truth. Now they were coming forward. But amid the chaos, Denzel Washington remained silent. Until a cryptic tweet appeared from his verified account. "Not all truths need a microphone. Some just need light." The post went viral in seconds. People read it like a message of war, but one of grace, not vengeance. Meanwhile, Marcus and Alana were facing threats. Their apartment had been broken into the night before. Nothing stolen, just turned upside down. A warning. Alana wanted to leave the city. Marcus refused. "If we disappear now, they win," he said. Instead, they went to the press. Not the mainstream, the independent channel Truthwire agreed to air the entire file dump during a live special. Hosted by veteran journalist Layla Monroe, known for her fearless war reporting and refusal to play political games. The night of the broadcast was unlike anything the country had seen. No commercial breaks, no dramatic graphics. Just Layla at a desk, calmly reading document after document. Breaking down how the media industry had turned truth into theater. But the final segment held the heaviest weight. Footage was shown that had never aired, unedited, raw, and time-stamped from the night of the original broadcast. After Denzel's now famous "My Roots Are Here" speech, Bondi hadn't just been stunned. She had lashed out off camera, unaware a secondary mic was still hot. Her words were venomous, cruel. She had cursed at producers, threatened to sue, and claimed the panel had been hijacked by woke garbage. Then she said something that froze the blood of anyone watching. "Why didn't you cut the feed before he got political? I told you this could blow everything." It wasn't just bigotry. It was collusion. It's by the end of the Truthwire broadcast. Twitter was on fire. Politicians were calling for resignations. Law firms were preparing lawsuits. Viewers were canceling their subscriptions to the network in real time. The dominoes were falling. And yet, a deeper question began to rise across comment sections and media forums. If they did this to Denzel, who else have they done it to? More names were being whispered now. Activists, artists, even foreign guests, who had once spoken on American media and vanished afterward. Stories the public had forgotten or been told to forget. Suddenly, international media picked up the scent. In the UK, a whistleblower from a former joint production company stepped forward, revealing that manipulation wasn't limited to American guests. Interviews were staged across countries, with racial tension dialed up deliberately for global virality. A dark map was forming. Okay? At the center of it always was the idea that conflict sold better than truth. In a hotel lobby somewhere in Los Angeles, Denzel watched the reports play out on a muted screen. People passed by, unaware the man at the corner table had started a revolution simply by refusing to get angry. A young boy walked past him and stopped. He looked at Denzel, recognizing his face not from a movie, but from the clip his teacher had shown the class just hours before. "Are you the man who said the thing about the roots?" Denzel smiled. "I am." The boy nodded seriously, then said that was the realest thing I've ever heard. As the boy walked off, Denzel leaned back in his chair, the city buzzing. Beyond the window, the media had tried to twist his silence, but the truth had found its way out. And it was louder than ever. The Senate chamber was unusually full. Cameras lined the marble walls. Journalists whispered behind their laptops. On the floor, politicians from both parties sat with furrowed brows, watching as the first ever congressional inquiry into media ethics and racial bias in broadcasting was called to order. At the center of it all sat Marcus Hill, the young producer who had risked everything to leak the Project Sacrament files. Next to him sat Alana Reyes, the researcher whose quiet brilliance had uncovered the data links buried in years of studio footage. They weren't activists, not politicians, just ordinary professionals who had decided silence was no longer an option. Behind them sat someone unexpected. Denzel Washington, not as a witness, not as a celebrity, just a citizen. The committee chairman leaned into the mic. "Let the record show that this hearing was prompted by footage, aired not by a network, but by citizens. Footage that exposed the deliberate use of race, trauma, and manipulation to distort national dialogue. We are here today to determine who is responsible and what must change." As Alana began to speak, the country tuned in again. Her testimony was quiet, clear, no drama, just facts. Spreadsheets, emails, video cuts before and after editing. She explained how Bondi's now infamous remark wasn't the result of random confrontation. It had been rehearsed, tested in closed panels for audience reactivity. The show's producers knew she might push the line, but they counted on Denzel to respond with passion, maybe even anger. That's what they had bet on. That was the plan. But Denzel had broken the algorithm. His calm destroyed the frame. It hadn't just gone viral, it had rewritten the narrative in real time. Marcus followed, reading from internal memos that revealed layers of media strategy. Fear-based content drew longer viewership. How racially charged segments were performance stress-tested to find emotional breaking points for live guests. The chamber fell silent more than once. Then the chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Washington, would you care to offer?" A statement for the record. All heads turned. Cameras zoomed. Denzel stood slowly. He wore a plain dark suit. No entourage. No script. He stepped to the mic. "I never intended to become part of this moment," he began. "I came to talk about a film, about generational pain, about redemption. What happened instead was a different kind of exposure. Not mine, theirs." He looked directly at the senators. "For years, we've told stories to heal, to warn, to inspire. But what happens when stories are stolen, repackaged, and sold back to us as distraction? What happens when truth becomes just another content bucket?" He paused. No one moved. I didn't speak up because I was brave. I spoke because someone tried to define my belonging in front of millions. And I've learned that the quietest truth will always hit harder than the loudest lie. The crowd didn't clap, not because they didn't want to, because they couldn't move. The hearing ended with a standing ovation from the gallery. The committee announced the formation of a special commission on media integrity, promising transparency reforms, federal oversight of live broadcast standards, and the protection of whistleblowers. Pam Bondi. She resigned from her media position. That evening, her apology came not in a press conference, but as a single line in a lawyer's statement. I deeply regret my role in perpetuating a system designed to divide. It didn't change her legacy, but it proved the weight of what had happened. Outside the Capitol that night, crowds gathered with candles and signs. Some held posters of Denzel's face next to the quote that had traveled the world. My roots are here, deep, painful, and unmovable. Teachers now taught it in classrooms. It was etched into murals in Baltimore, Detroit, and Atlanta. It was painted on walls in Nairobi, projected on buildings in Berlin. Because the story had stopped being about a broadcast long ago, it had become a mirror, a reminder that not all power is loud. That truth, when spoken without fear in the right moment, can bring down the whole show. And as Denzel walked out into the night, past reporters and cameras and thousands of flashbulbs, he said nothing at all. He didn't have to. The world was already listening.